You have probably lit a candle, sat around a bonfire, or watched smoke curl up from something burning and thought nothing of it. Smoke is just smoke, but somewhere in your deep past, a group of people sitting beside a fire figured out something else entirely. Certain smoke, pulled in through the mouth, changes how you feel. And once they discovered that, they never stopped chasing it. For most of human history, fire meant warmth, cooking, and light. It did not mean inhaling anything on purpose. Smoking, the deliberate act of burning a plant and drawing its smoke into the lungs, required a completely different kind of discovery, one that could only happen after someone noticed a very specific and very strange effect. Plenty of plants smell unpleasant when burned. Plenty produce nothing at all beyond smoke and ash. Somewhere, at some point, one particular plant produced something else. A feeling distinct enough that someone decided it was worth doing again. Start with the oldest known case. In 2021, a research team led by archaeologist Daron Duke of the far Western Anthropological Research Group excavated a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah known as the Wishbone site. Inside an intact Ice Age hearth, surrounded by stone spear tips and duck bones, they found 4 small charred seeds. The seeds belonged to a wild tobacco plant called Nicotiana attenuata. Radiocarbon dating placed the hearth at roughly 12,300 years old, more than 9,000 years older than any previously known evidence of tobacco use anywhere on Earth. Here is why that finding mattered so much. Tobacco seeds are tiny and they do not burn well, which meant they were unlikely to have simply fallen into a cooking fire by accident. Ducks, whose bones filled the hearth, do not eat tobacco either, ruling out the possibility that the seeds arrived inside a duck's stomach. Everything about the context pointed to one conclusion. Someone at that fire, 12,000 years ago, deliberately placed tobacco into the flames, almost certainly aware of what it would do to them. Think about what that actually required. These were Ice Age hunter-gatherers, people focused day to day on tracking game, finding water, and surviving brutal cold. Every hour spent experimenting with an unfamiliar plant was an hour not spent hunting, not spent gathering, not spent doing any of the things that kept a small band alive through a harsh season. And somewhere in the middle of that relentless struggle, someone paused long enough to notice that a particular plant, burned and inhaled, produced a feeling worth chasing again. That kind of observation is not accidental. It is curious, deliberate, and remarkably human. Now picture the scene directly. A small hunting party has just finished a duck, the bones tossed near the fire. Someone reaches for a handful of tough, bitter leaves growing near the marsh. Leaves everyone already knows will make you sick if you eat too many. But someone tries something different this time. Instead of eating the leaves, they drop a few into the coals and lean over the rising smoke, breathing it in. The reaction is immediate, unfamiliar, and strangely compelling. Word spreads through the group. Within a generation or two, everyone at that fire knows exactly which plant to reach for and exactly what to do with it. For thousands of years after that first Utah discovery, direct evidence of tobacco use goes quiet in the archaeological record, mostly because seeds and residue rarely survive that long. The next confirmed marker comes from an entirely different kind of evidence, one carved from stone. In 2018, archaeologist Stephen Carmody at Troy University, working with chemist John Russ and a team of colleagues, tested 36 ancient pipes recovered from sites across the southeastern United States using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, a technique sensitive enough to detect trace chemical residue clinging to stone thousands of years after last use. One pipe excavated decades earlier from the Flint River site in northern Alabama, and radiocarbon dated using deer bone found beside it, tested positive for nicotine. The pipe dated to somewhere between 1685 and 1530 BC, pushing the confirmed evidence of tobacco smoking in North America, back by roughly 1,000 years compared to what had been previously documented. This was not casual evidence. Nicotine is a specific, identifiable biomarker. Finding it embedded inside a carved stone pipe meant the connection between tobacco and deliberate smoking, rather than chewing or some other use, was now chemically confirmed, not just assumed from historical accounts written centuries later. The pipe itself had an unusual story. It was originally excavated in the late 1930s by engineers working ahead of a dam project that would soon flood the entire valley, then placed in storage and largely forgotten for close to 80 years before Carmody and his team finally tested it using modern chemical techniques that simply did not exist when it was first pulled from the ground. In other words, the evidence had been sitting quietly in a drawer for generations, waiting for the right tools to finally reveal what it had been holding on to the entire time. Further west, the picture gets even more specific. Anthropologist Shannon Tushingham at Washington State University studied pipes from the Pacific Northwest, a colder and wetter region where two distinct wild tobacco species grow. Her team expected to find biomarkers for kinnikinnick, a traditional smoking blend historically associated with the region and documented extensively in accounts written after European contact. What they found instead, again and again, was tobacco, suggesting that even in an environment where an alternative smoking plant was readily available and culturally documented, tobacco remained the substance people consistently reached for. The written historical record, it turned out, had been telling only part of the story, and the chemistry preserved inside the pipes themselves told a longer, older version. Here's the twist worth sitting with. Smoking was never really about the fire. It was about a discovery that fire could be used as a delivery system, a way to pull a chemical effect out of a plant and send it directly into the body faster than eating or drinking ever could. Nicotine absorbed through the lungs reaches the brain in seconds, far faster than through the stomach. Whether or not anyone 12,000 years ago understood the biology, they understood the result. Inhaling worked differently and worked faster than anything else they had tried. That single discovery, repeated independently across the deserts of Utah, the river valleys of Alabama, and the forests of the Pacific Northwest, tells you something important. This was not one isolated group stumbling onto a strange local custom. Across thousands of miles and thousands of years, different communities, with no contact between them and no shared language, kept arriving at the exact same behavior, burning a specific plant and breathing in the result again and again, long before anyone could write any of it down. By the time written history begins, tobacco had already become deeply woven into ceremony, diplomacy, and ritual across North and South America, used to seal agreements, honor the dead, and mark sacred moments. That cultural weight did not appear overnight. It was built slowly, generation after generation, starting from that first hearth in the Utah desert. Long before agriculture, long before cities, long before anyone had a word for addiction, entire diplomatic relationships between nations would later be built around the shared ritual of passing a pipe, a practice with roots stretching back further than any of the empires that eventually adopted it. Now think about your own relationship with smoke. Whether it is a cigarette, a vape, or simply a habit you have watched someone else struggle to quit. The mechanism driving that pull, a fast-acting chemical delivered straight to the brain through the lungs, has not changed in 12,000 years. What has changed is the journey of the plant itself, from a handful of wild leaves dropped into an ice age fire, to industrially processed products designed and marketed for exactly the reaction those ancient hunters first noticed by accident. The instinct did not start with a cigarette company. It started with curiosity beside a fire, on a cold night, in a desert that no longer exists in the same form today. Someone noticed smoke could do something no one had expected, and once they noticed, humanity never really stopped chasing that same feeling. If you enjoyed learning how ancient humans really lived, hit subscribe. Stick Age brings you a new story from deep human history every week.